once again, just want to thank you all for joining. We're continuing to have people signing on, so we're just going to give it 1 to 2 more minutes, and then we'll be on to get our panel started. Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Good, I guess, yes, it is now afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone. So appreciate that everyone was able to join us. My name's Emily Goldstein. I'm the Director of Organizing and Advocacy at the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development in New York City. I'm tuning in from Brooklyn.
Hey, Emily, and I'm Guillermo Gomez, Program Director at the Urban Design for tuning in from Ridgewood, Queens.
Awesome. It's so good to be here with you, Guillermo, and with everyone, with all of the members and friends who are joining us perhaps on your lunch hour. I'm really excited to hear from our amazing speakers at this 3rd event in our discussion series called Power After the Pandemic. Briefly, for those of you who are new to ANHD, we work to build community power and win affordable housing and thriving, equitable neighborhoods for all New Yorkers. ANHD has been around for more than 40 years, and we represent over 80 neighborhood-based and citywide not-for-profit organizations who develop, preserve, and manage affordable housing, push for tenants' rights, support small businesses, advocate for responsible banking, and just work to preserve industrial space and quality jobs in our communities. We believe that racial justice is housing justice is economic justice.
And for those of you who are new to the forum, we are an independent membership organization that debates the critical issues facing our city. Our fellows are designers, developers, and public officials and advocates eager to shape a better future for all New Yorkers. And usually in normal times, we kind of squeeze around dimly lit tables, exchange ideas, debate, argue about what our city could be. And we're incredibly excited to partner with ANHD for Power After the Pandemic to bridge our constituencies in community development, neighborhood advocacy, urban design, public policy to define really a vision for a post-pandemic city.
We're so grateful to partner with UDF for this series and really excited to bring you all into these important and powerful conversations alongside them as partners. Of course, the series is called Power After the Pandemic, but we're not after yet. The pandemic is far from over. We're still grappling with how to remain healthy in our schools and workplaces. Both the health and economic consequences, especially for New York's Black and Brown neighborhoods, immigrant communities, and cultural producers, are devastating. And at least here in New York City, the disparities and impacts that we're seeing have really helped to lay bare the ways in which many of our existing systems for planning and for doing business in our city are inadequate. It's prompting us to think big and think bold and question how to set up systems that will meet the moment and take us into the future. So there's a lot to figure out, and there are still enormous challenges to come, including, of course, the federal election, budget crisis, and who knows what else 2020 will throw at us. But it's important to remain hopeful. And so through this series, we're aiming to find inspiration, hear from community development, urban design, and public policy leaders who have bright ideas to make sure that we never get here again. We launched our series earlier this month with a fireside chat between ANHD's Executive Director, Barika Williams, and scholar Mirsa Baradaran on systemic racial inequalities of our economic system, and also hosted an event on how we can imagine banking policy to expand access to capital for our struggling small businesses. So as we continue these series, we'll prompt all of our speakers. What's the one big thing, the one transformational change you'd like to see emerge from this crisis? In the coming months, we'll continue to organize discussions with leaders in finance, housing, transportation, and economic development. We're also hoping to hear from you and recreate that community that's been frayed these past few months. So please stick around for an extra half hour after this event to share your thoughts and big ideas in smaller breakout groups. We'll provide a Zoom link now in the chat and again towards the end of our event. And with that, I will hand things off to Guillermo to introduce our speakers.
Thanks for that intro, Emily. And welcome again, everyone. So as the forum and ANHD kind of explore alternative and new ideas, really paths forward for a just recovery in New York City, we really wanted to center transportation equity in the discussion. And historically, we've seen transportation planning and infrastructure really rip through Black and brown neighborhoods and often see the high cost of public transit affect mobility and job accessibility in those same communities. Not only is it about job access, it's also about climate. With New York's aggressive energy goals for a net zero carbon city by 2050, we'll have to think really big and act really quickly to reimagine our transportation landscape away from cars. We have three inspiring transit leaders and voices joining us in conversation today. Prior to the event, we asked each of them, how should cities reimagine transportation planning in order to ensure equity and access for the most vulnerable residents? So today's event breaks down as follows. We'll first invite Betsy Plum, Executive Director of Riders Alliance, a grassroots membership organization of subway and bus riders dedicated to winning better transit in New York City, followed by Warren Logan, Policy Director of Mobility and Interagency Relations for the Mayor's Office of Oakland. He is responsible for advancing the city's vision for safe and sustainable transportation, which actually became the first city to launch the Slow Streets initiative. And Robbie Makinen will end our presentations, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, where he's led the Kansas City region through a dramatic transformation aimed at bringing together 5 different transit systems under one umbrella. I'll follow up the presentations with a couple of questions to kick off our conversation and get it into gear, and then we'll welcome questions from our listeners and our viewers. So let me invite Betsy Plum to turn her camera on and start off today's discussion. Betsy, are you with us?
I am. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
So let's make sure you have access to share screen, right?
I do.
Okay,
yes,
terrific.
Yes.
Okay, see you soon.
See you soon. Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Betsy. I work with the Riders Alliance. We fight every single day to have a more equitable, more inclusive, more accessible, and more sustainable New York City by winning better public transportation. I am really grateful to be here today for our conversation. Thank you to ANHD and UDF. I want to dive right in because I know we have limited time and a lot of things to talk about. With some top line thoughts about our current moment with transit and streets in New York City and some of the work, challenge, and opportunity we see ahead at the Riders Alliance. There we go. Sorry about that. We have 2 great assets in transportation in New York City and in cities across the country. We have our streets and we have our public transit systems. But at the height of the pandemic, these 2 great assets that we have had very different experiences. Streets have seen the benefits of fewer cars, the ability to take back more of the road, what a world where we deprioritize cars could mean for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for bus riders, for air quality, overall quality of life, and I think really critically in this moment, equity in that quality of life. And then there is the transit system, our incredible network of buses and subways, which had no choice but to keep churning throughout the pandemic in order to carry our public health response, but which saw disaster rather than opportunity in this crisis. For streets, The pandemic showed what is possible in a way that few other circumstances could have demonstrated. And now we need to fight to hold on to those gains. And for the transit system, the pandemic showed just how precarious the situation was before and offered no choice but to keep all systems going. It can't be understated how great that cost was and how much we are going to need to do to band together to fight to save transit systems in a moment of truly existential crisis and need. In New York City, billions of dollars have been lost in revenues. We need $12 billion to carry the MTA through the end of 2021. That is something that for the first time ever, and this is my big innovation, the federal government needs to have a role. For the first time ever, rider groups like ours are banding together across the country to demand that the federal government step up and provide funding, critical rescue funding for transit systems. We are asking for $32 billion for systems across the country, with $12 billion coming home here to New York for the MTA. But it's important to note that that $12 billion, that doesn't solve the problem. It is $12 billion for an agency that was already $44 billion in debt when the pandemic hit. But without this funding, we are looking at a truly doomsday reality in New York City, where we could lose upwards of half of all of our subway and bus service, and we could see fare hikes upwards of $9 has been estimated by the Regional Plan Association. These types of service cuts, these types of fare hikes would decimate the system as we know it. Daily commute times would increase by more than an hour for riders. And we know that those service cuts, those wait times would not be felt equitably. Black New Yorkers, as just one example, are already 23% more likely to use transit and endure 26% longer commutes as compared to white New Yorkers. Healthcare workers, one of our most critical essential workforces right now, they have the longest commutes of any workforce in the system right now. Service cuts certainly hurt the entire system, but they rob precious time from those who can least afford it. This is not just a New York City problem. This is shared across the country. And it really does beg the question, how did we get to this place, and what do we need to do differently to climb out of this hole and really into a different reality? And there are three core pieces. We need to understand how we got here. We need to radically shift our perspectives on how we support core public services like transit. And we have to understand just how core well-functioning transit is to an equitable recovery and the power after the pandemic that we are all talking about today and in this entire series. So how did we get here without the PhD, which, you know, I could talk a lot about financial accountability and transparency issues, especially with the MTA, but putting those aside for the moment, I think it's really important to understand that transit systems across the country have been chronically underfunded for decades, and they've also been very over-reliant on fares. What that does is it perpetuates a self-defeating expectation that a critical public service should and can survive on user fees. And it leads to a cycle of declining ridership and increasing fares. And critically, it makes a moment like right now, when a global pandemic hits, and that reduces ridership and fares by 80–90% overnight, but the system cannot stop. All you have a choice but to be left with is a truly existential threat to survival. So we are here in this complex funding predicament for many reasons, but I think a big one that we're all coming to realize and fight around is that transit operations do not receive the federal support that they should or could have. Congress and federal agencies have given far more thought, commitment, and prioritization to highways than they ever have to public transit. And that does need to change immediately. Even when we do get money in New York City, it isn't proportionately shared. We have 40% of transit riders here in New York City, but as one example, with the CARES Act and aid dollars that came through, we got only 15% of that funding. we need to reassess how we as a country prioritize our public services and our public institutions, and public transit is absolutely key among that reanalysis. We need the government, the federal government, to step in with emergency funds. We need them to step in the longer term, because we know that there is no recovery from coronavirus and its recession without public transit. If we can't get healthcare workers to hospitals and clinics, we can't save lives. If we can't get grocery store workers to stores, we can't put food on the shelves. I can go on with that list every single day, but what we know is that transit is absolutely at the center. Highways have had a powerful lobby in DC. Public transit has always been outmatched. Transit has not been on the map for the country's major progressive organizations, and even for grassroots organizations like the Riders Alliance. We have traditionally focused on local and state fights, and that is something that's changing. Groups like ours are joining together with organizations across the country to pay increasing attention to Washington, D.C. What happens there, it positively and negatively shapes our local opportunities. We are fighting for this emergency aid. We are fighting to make sure that USDOT, the Department of Transportation at the federal level, allows us to implement North America's first ever congestion pricing program. But we haven't lost sight of our local and state level fights. We need our governor to restore overnight subway service. We need to continue mapping bus lanes across the city in every single neighborhood. We need to expand fair fares programs and fare integration programs. We know right now that fares are a critical revenue source for the MTA. They are 40% of the budget, but they are still a regressive revenue source. Ultimately, each of these fights underscore our vision for an equitable recovery and power after the pandemic. We can't mobilize the resources that we need or build the society that we want without fully funded and operational public transit. We need green buses and trains to move people to free schools and colleges. We need that transit to move people between stable homes and good jobs to healthcare that's covered by social insurance, and we need unionized jobs associated with such a system. Transit is absolutely that connective tissue. And in the New York City example, it's what allows someone to move here, live in the furthest reaches of the city, and still have the same opportunity as so many others. And we really do feel that there is a transformational moment ahead of us to continue this fight. And that's something that there's so much to be frightened about right now, but is something that I'm really excited about. The potential to work hand in hand with partners across the country, working together, even if our systems are very, very different, because we fundamentally do believe in equity in streets and equity in transit. We do need to be demanding democratic accountability and ensuring that our systems themselves reflect our aspirations for a just and equitable multiracial democracy. That will take far more dollars. That will take expanding service into communities whose needs transit agencies have long ignored. It means changing how transit decisions are made and who is involved in making them. And that's where grassroots organizing groups like ours come in. Transit is a lot about infrastructure, but we want to make it so that when you think about transit, you don't think just of subway trains and buses, but that your first thought is actually about the people who are using that transit system, seeing past the bus to the people on it. When we do that, all of a sudden we see every single social justice fight, from building a truly anti-racist society to education reforms to healthcare equity and on and on. Out of this pandemic, out of so much heartbreak, we need to build the society that we want. And I would argue that that society is built on bus lanes and on subway tracks from Brooklyn to Kansas City to Oakland. And I'm really excited to hear from my colleagues for the conversation, but I do hope you will all join in this fight and join a growing transit justice movement across the country.
Thank you so much for that, Betsy, and really laying out the urgency around federal aid. I want to invite Warren to join us on screen, and we'll pass the mic on to him. Betsy, do you mind unsharing your screen really quickly so we can pass?
There we go, sorry.
Oh, there we go, perfect. Thank you so much. Terrific. Thanks, Betsy.
And I'll start sharing my screen, thanks. Let's do this. Hey everybody, I am Warren Logan and I'm the Mayor's Policy Director of Mobility and Interagency Relations here in the city of Oakland. I'm really excited to be talking to all of you today about power after the pandemic and ideally what it will look like after we get through this pandemic. I want to start my presentation off by sharing a bit about the ways in which Oakland has used our rights of way creatively and tried to respond to each of the different challenges that we've received during the pandemic. So this quick explanation where on the farthest left, you'll see here that at the beginning of COVID, we started using our streets and our properties for COVID testing. We partnered with the county and other community clinics and are ultimately supporting community partnerships through both our philanthropic funds and also the county's funding to provide testing. What I'm trying to focus on is the mid three here today, which are both our slow streets, essential places, and flex streets programs that encourage traffic calming in neighborhood streets. We are providing safe crossings to essential places, as you might imagine, and then finally helping our businesses back on their feet and providing physical distance space for their patrons. The last piece that I'll just share is our longstanding program called Paint the Town, where we actually allow neighborhood community partners to paint murals that represent their culture. And I like to start my presentations off by giving you the conclusion first so that you know what to look for. In terms of the way that I see the end of this pandemic and what power might look like after we get through all of this is that I'd love to see both my city and by extension lots of cities focus on community partnerships that help people use our public spaces creatively for the best of their needs. The second is to provide new opportunities for everybody to better socially connect. I think a lot of us are feeling very disconnected right now. And then finally, especially in the case of Oakland, to continue to be unapologetically advancing racial equity. So let's talk about slow streets. Very briefly, for many of you, you've probably have heard about our program. I hope you have. In April, the mayor declared that 74 miles of Oakland's neighborhood bikeways were available for slow streets treatments. And what that looked like was we were going to close roads to through traffic, provide short signs and barricades, and discourage people from sort of driving quickly through neighborhoods. And the key goal, of course, that we wanted to make sure people were both safe in their neighborhood, were provided, physical distance space for, outdoor recreation activities. And underneath that, we also recognized that many of these streets were on our high injury network within our bike. And so we wanted to make sure that while at the time, and still for many cities, we were seeing a surge in our hospitals, we weren't sending more people unnecessarily to the hospital, right? What's interesting is that we received a lot of different feedback from our neighbors, right? So in Oakland is sort of an L. And so North and West Oakland shared a lot of positive feedback about the program and were really enthusiastic about the ways in which they were able to, as you can see in this picture, stroll along the street. A lot of people outdoors, and it was a perfect time, in the middle of, sunshine, which I guess we have perennially in Oakland, to just start stretching our legs out. The challenge, though, was that when we continue to engage with our East Oakland neighbors, which are predominantly our neighborhoods of color, and some of which are lower socioeconomic neighborhoods as well, they shared with us that we had completely missed the mark in their opinion, and that it was time to either reverse course or pivot or something. And so based on a lot of feedback that we received and sort of the working groups that we set up, we found ways to better engage, which I think is a really critical component of any positive program. And we also found that people were looking for us to prioritize helping them walk and bike and even drive to their essential places. And so we launched a program called Essential Places. And this is in fact the first one in Oakland. We've since upgraded it to not have cones because we apparently, fun joke, created a shortage of cones in Northern California because we bought all of the traffic cones. That being said, the Essential Places program focuses primarily on helping residents connect to, as you might expect, essential places. So that includes grocery stores and other food distribution points, clinics, and testing sites. And what's really cool about that is that we are able to use the same toolkit, quick build, cones, signs, to really help people who are really in need. And I think what's exciting about the Essential Places program is that it was also a way for us to not only better serve a community that felt we had missed the mark, but also prove that A, we can acknowledge our mistakes, and B, we are in fact committed to righting the wrongs, right? Like if we messed up, we're going to fix the problem. And I think that that's something that governments are not always either well equipped to do or are well interested in doing themselves. And so I think that's the other part that I want to really focus on after the pandemic is a humility and a level of collaboration that I've never really seen from government agencies before. The last program I want to focus on is called Flex Streets. And we launched this program actually shortly after Slow Streets. And a lot of what's baked into this program for physical spaces for businesses is the lessons learned that we gathered from the first month of Slow Streets. And so we launched the program in about 2 weeks of work from a number of different departments. And for the government wonks in the audience, we rewrote 5 different programs, minor and major encroachments, some of our requirements, traffic calming, and special events in 2 weeks. So that is how many different hands had to touch this program. And what it does is it allows people, businesses to use their sidewalks, parking lanes, and travel lanes for merchant activity, whether that be, as you see here, outdoor dining or other activities that are subject to the shelter-in-place guidelines for the county. Here's another really great photo of, on the right-hand side, and it's kind of funny. This is actually a 3-lane street with a bikeway that has been narrowed to 1 lane and is an outdoor, it's called the Athletic Club. They show different sports broadcasts. And so this is, according to the owner, really helped save their business during the time. And again, it has provided an opportunity for government to be responsive and to collaborate with our businesses to just provide them whatever they need. I think what's also really critical here is that I started timing the amount of time it takes to get a permit. And it's, again, for the wonky folks in the audience, you'll understand that typically parklets take years to get, they cost tens of thousands of dollars, and sometimes never actually come to fruition. And our permits are free. And for the sidewalk cafes are instant. It takes about 2 to 4 weeks to get a parklet and the same amount of time to close a street. And I've never seen any government work that quickly to respond to the moment. So again, responsiveness and collaboration. This is another image of a great parklet, again, sort of a sports facility in Oakland as well. There are 2 more lessons learned that I want to focus on, and this is again sort of thinking about power after the pandemic, is that none of these programs would have been successful without the significant level of volunteer support that we received from our community groups, from our neighbors, from our partners. And that says something about the spirit of cities, and especially the spirit of the residents and neighbors within Oakland, that we are so interested in helping each other, and that it's important for us, especially in seats of power, to provide opportunities for people to better connect and to better support the programs that they really love. And finally, and I think this is my last slide, it's important for us to remember that our rights of way, even our pavement on our streets, should represent the people who live in our communities. And so this is actually a mural. It's the city's largest street mural, and probably largest in the state. And it is all of the different intersections of Black lives. And this is one of the slow streets in Oakland. It's around our sort of famous Lake Merritt. And what it represents for so many people is the fact that we're able to lift up community voices, share in a collaborative effort, and showcase the culture that really represents here in Oakland. So I'm excited to continue this conversation with everyone, both talking about how we can advance community partnerships, provide collaborative space, and really use our rights of way really creatively. So thank you.
Thank you, Warren. That was terrific and really, really impressive at the level of speed at which you guys are implementing projects in the past couple of months. I want to invite Robbie to kind of join us. I'm going to try to turn on your microphone in just a second. Do we hear you, Robbie? Is your mic on?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you perfectly. I'm going to try to turn on your camera, but if not, feel free to launch into discussion. We're really excited to hear what Kansas City's been working on.
Is it on?
One moment. If not, feel free to take it away, and we'll figure out the technical stuff in the background.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me today. The fact of the matter is, what the pandemic has done is it has crystallized the fact that you may not use public transit, but you depend on a lot of people every day who do. Okay. The return on investment for empathy, for compassion, for access and options far outweighs the return on investment for concrete and asphalt and steel. And I say that because what I was asked to talk about today is zero fare. And that's what I'm going to talk about. That's your big idea. And whether you're in a huge agency like New York or an agency like mine in Kansas City, I'm just going to tell you what's happened here. Okay. We went zero fare. We didn't just flip a switch and say we were going to do this. We started actually with a process of we made zero fare for all the veterans in our whole region and got about 4 million trips out of that. Then we went and did a partnership with the school district so that all of our high school kids could have zero fare. Then we went to safety net providers, domestic violence shelters, places like that, and did a partnership with them and allowed that to happen. So by the time we got through that, we looked up and 20-some% of our ridership was free already. Okay, so what COVID allowed us to do is then we started just making it free across the board, obviously for touch point, from a touch point standpoint, obviously for giving people access. Okay, so you notice I didn't call it free transit. All right, the moment you say free transit, somebody goes, no, that's not true. I got to pay for that with my tax dollars. And well, you're absolutely right. It's not free. Okay, but what do you want to invest in? Okay, do you want to invest in people or do you want to invest in concrete? It's that simple of a choice. We've decided to invest in people. And by what I mean by that is it's $1.50 to ride our service, right? Or it was, okay? You take that $1.50 of a family member, a single mom with a couple of kids or whatever, and that comes to, it's $1,500, $2,000 a year. And if you're putting that back in her pocket, where's that money going to go? It's not going to go to some tax shelter in the Bahamas. It's going to go right back into the community. It's going to generate sales tax. You're going to buy a prescription, buy some food, buy a pair of shoes, whatever that is. That money will actually roll over. That $1.50 will roll over 3 or 4 times before. Otherwise, it comes into my agency. And what's my agency going to do? We're going to keep the bureaucracy going here. We'll have some more pizza parties. We'll buy more Post-it notes. We'll buy more memberships and 10 top tables at a chamber dinner. Or, why not? Why don't you take the money that you get, taxpayer money, and put it where it's supposed to go and start to help people? And I guarantee you, I'm speaking treason here. I get it. I don't get invited to many parties at transit agencies or transit association meetings. But the fact of the matter is, all of these transit agencies are big bureaucracies. And when I came in here, it was like, look, let's start cutting this thing down. Number one, we have to be flexible and nimble enough to be able to move. Whereas now or before, you know, it's like that big battleship that by the time you move to that target, the target's gone already. All right. So cutting all that stuff down without cutting service and without cutting our frontline employees, but actually digging into just the waste that's going on here. We did a fantastic job and we got halfway there already. How much does it cost me? You know, you said somebody said that New York was like 40%. Is it really 40%? Okay, no, just like it wasn't for me. The fact of the matter is, how much money do you spend on public safety, or excuse me, on officers to catch scofflaws, if you will, for jumping a turnstile or not paying a fare or whatever? And those are actually the people that need it the most. Okay, why are you going to run away from the people that need you the most? You as a transit agent, you should be running toward them. And that's what we're doing here. That's a lot of money that you spend for that kind of thing. It cost me $1 million just to collect it. I can't even imagine what it costs out there. Okay, so is the number you're really looking at the right number? No, I guarantee it's lower than that. Okay, and when you talk about the fact that yes, no transit agency, oh my gosh, you don't want to give up your money. It's you know, never heard of such a thing. But that's the difference, because if you just want to act like a regular public transit agency and you want to sit on an island out there by yourself and you want to be that person or that agency that says, okay, you want this route from here to A to B, and then we put the blinders on and go, okay, there it is. Here's how much it costs. Pay me. But then not worry about the rest of it. Not worry about from a crime standpoint or community development standpoint, economic development standpoint. Well, that's not our problem. We're just the transit guys. No, you as a transit agency, you are the glue. And nothing has showed us more than this pandemic about, you know, the transit agencies are what's keeping these cities breathing. Okay, you know that as well as I do. So why don't you take your transit agency and start weaving it into the fabric of the community as a whole? I'm gonna give you a perfect example. You know, we put in a new bus rapid transit on Prospect over here, $56 million investment, but we didn't just stop there. What we then also did is picked up a couple of the properties around the neighborhood or whatever. We tore down a building that had to do with had a lot of crime, had a lot of drug stuff, whatever. And you know what? When we tore down, we had like 600 people from the neighborhood come, and we're just thrilled that we did that. And we were taking a notice outside of the regular just public transit. Okay, so again, that $1,500, $2,000 per person, and when we're talking about, you know, right now we're doing probably 40,000 trips a day. Which doesn't seem like a lot to you all, but you know, it is to us. You take that, that's over $1.5 million, about $1.5 million a month. That's not going into my coffers. It's being pumped right back into the local community by the transit agency. All right. So what is the return on investment there? That we've had the local university start looking at this, saying, you know what? Instead of that $8 million you get for revenue, it's going to generate $17 million of economic activity. Like I said, that $1.50 rolls over. Okay, so in my opinion, we just need to, you know, a blind guy telling you this, but we need to step through the looking glass here, Alice, and we need to look at public transit for the next 30 years, not the past 30. We need to think differently. We need to think about breaking down barriers instead of putting them up. You know, somebody would say, oh, well, you can't do that. People have to pay. They're already paying for it, okay? As far as I'm concerned, you're getting taxed twice. And it's our low-income families that are getting, somebody said something about regressive. You're darn right, okay? And as far as I'm concerned, they're getting taxed twice. They pay their taxes, and now they got to get on the bus and pay again? Think about that for just a second, all right? But if you can offer that opportunity, and what we did when COVID started, everybody else lost all their, look, ridership is a byproduct, okay? Ridership is a byproduct of, do you have a system that people have access to, that they have options that they can pick, okay? And when you get to that point, you know, your ridership will come, right? So we don't look at that. And that's why every transit agency in this nation, they've been taught and live and breathe, everything's about ridership, everything's about ridership. No, I don't believe that, okay? Again, I believe ridership's a byproduct, and I can prove that. As soon as as soon as we made the whole system zero fare, while everybody else went down when the pandemic started to 10%, 20% of their ridership, we were still at 60. Okay, we never went below 50, and that's even after stopping half of our routes. Why? Because people knew they could depend on it, because people who had to get to work, because people who had to clean a hospital room, who had to go in and work at the cash register in the grocery store or whatever, they had to get there. They didn't have a choice. Okay, so don't run away from the people that need you the most. Run toward them. I look at this as a opportunity. Okay, and let's talk about that development side. What we're doing here is starting to diversify our funding streams. Yes, what I can't stand is that if everybody's going to go around and we're just going to go to the federal government, or we're going to go to the local government, and we're going to say, okay, woe is us, we need more money. Well, that's fine, and I understand that, and we do. Okay, but you got to look inside yourself too and find out what we can do better, what we can do, work smarter, not harder, right? And that kind of thing, to be able to give them the confidence to know that we're not just sitting over here saying we can't do anything unless we gain money. We're diversifying our funding streams. Hooking economic development together with public transit is to me part of the next 20 years of public transit. Okay, it's building a model like we are here, where when somebody comes in to develop a piece of property, as part of the development, public transit is part of the infrastructure. It's part of the clawback for curbs, gutters, sewers, whatever. Public transit is in that mix now. And we've done a couple of deals in the region here where, okay, now a CID or part of the TDD is paying for that. So we don't have to worry about that. It takes pressure off of the local government. It takes pressure off of a developer, because they can say, look, we're giving back. That's helping to pay for zero fare, that kind of thing. So I just truly believe that we just need to think about things a little bit different here, especially now that we have an opportunity with this crisis, that we can come out of this better on the other side. Did that make sense? Did everybody hear that?
That made perfect sense. Thank you so much for that really passionate argument for how important public transit is in cities. Maybe we can shift to our more kind of moderated discussion. I want to invite Betsy and Warren to join us on screen. I have a couple of questions before I start pulling some questions from our audience from the Q&A box. So you all, the three of you, laid out some incredible visionary ideas for how to ensure transportation equity in the future, especially post-COVID, from kind of community engagement process and planning in Oakland, really focusing on equity, to a national coalition, and then in Kansas City, really making zero fare transit really important, and really breaking down those barriers. I kind of want to ask the first question, maybe to Warren, and of course I'll open it up to the group. Kind of this repeated idea of kind of nimble government and speed. I think what's so impressive about Oakland's Slow Streets program is that it's kind of evolved really quickly over the past couple of months. I'm wondering, how can city governments be quick and nimble to allow more targeted responses to specific communities? What are the challenges of kind of jumping over that hurdle, especially when planning for historically underserved communities? What's kind of the secret to that speed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about this a lot, especially when I look backwards. I want to say 7 months. Time is a flat circle. So I think the way that we were able to move so quickly is that we're building off of an existing plan already. The streets that we highlighted for our Slow Streets program were documented the year before in a year-long engagement effort through our Let's Bike Oakland bike plan. I think the other element, and it gets to Robbie's earlier point as well, is that we want to invest in people and not in concrete. Cones and signage are really inexpensive. And so if it's not working, I'm not wedded to any one specific solution. And I think what's really exciting about both Slow Streets and Flex Streets and Essential Places is that it's really, really flexible. If, I had a number of people who obviously didn't like the program. And they're like, I just picked up that sign and I put it to the side, and that's how I feel about it. I'm like, that's actually okay, right? Like I would prefer people leave the signs in place, but the fact of the matter is the program is actually meant to be not only tactical urbanism, but like tactical in the sense that you yourself are empowered to move it if it's not working. And for us to be able to have weekly meetings with people and say, okay, we rolled out another street. How's it going? If it's not working, okay, let's try this, let's try that. I think lastly, and maybe I'm just repeating Robbie's point again, is that at the end of the day, you either want it or you don't. And I think, I don't mean for that to be blunt, but it's like, we finally just said we're gonna do it, and everybody just like, I don't want to say maybe everybody agreed, but at least from the city's standpoint, staff said, okay, well, we have a directive and we're going to pursue it. And that meant like, we're actually going to go down this path together. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do this quickly and see what happens.
Yeah, that humility that you pointed out earlier in your presentation was kind of amazing. I'm kind of curious to know, I'll pose that same question back to you, Robbie. What's the secret to that maybe speed and flexibility and responsiveness? Well,
like I said earlier, that the fact that you have to take your agency and you got to slim down. Okay, not only were we looking for efficiencies in different ways we could cut, not service and not frontline workers, but just within the bureaucracy here, makes us now more flexible and more nimble. The one thing I also add to this is it's buy-in. Okay, it's buy-in from the community, and since we started zero fare with the veterans and the VA and then the superintendents and the schools and the teachers and then the safety net providers, what we've done is pick them up to where they have bought in to the zero fare concept, and they now help us. So, for example, you can have a truancy officer actually. I don't want to fill a bunch of buses full of police officers, right? So what we're doing is offering resources. You could have school district members actually get on. We have safety net providers who, from Homeless Services Coalition and others, who now, instead of doing their outreach somewhere else, they do it on the vehicle. So they're actually on the bus and they're professionals and they can spot stuff and they can hand out resources and they can offer help, these kinds of things. So you've turned that bus into rather than turn it into a B-52 flying fortress with gun turrets and police officers on it, you've actually turned it into a place where people can get help and get pointed in the right direction and get resources. That's a big deal.
That's a good point, and it kind of leads me into my next question, perhaps kind of on management. I know in a previous call, Warren, we talked about who's kind of managing all this flexibility. I think in New York, most of the time that responsibility is kind of on transportation management and safety is put on the NYPD. And I think that's a little bit differently in Oakland. So kind of, I want to pose the next question to you, Betsy. In New York City, I know Riders Alliance has kind of really pointed at some of the real challenges about funding the MTA, but also kind of what many call, and also ties to your argument too, Robbie, around the criminalization of poverty. That's tied to fair enforcement. What are some of the ways in which we can both tackle budget and ensure really a just service?
Well, I love that you say just service. That is our campaign right now, focused on the governor, which really is about what do riders need in this moment of incredible hardship. And we know that at a moment when we're fighting for every last nickel and dime, putting another $249 million into cops on our transit system is not the place. We could increase off-peak service by, thank you, Robbie, by 15%. And allow our essential riders to be getting where they need to be going. But instead, we continue to prioritize a criminalization of the system. We continue to have a system that really does go after folks who are unable to pay fares. And that's why I mentioned fares programs like what we won in New York, and fare integration programs are just absolutely critical and will continue to be critical in our recovery. But I think it really does require an analysis that focuses on the highest users of the system, rather than just those who run the system making the decisions. And I think allowing that conversation of equity and priority and equity, those who are making the decisions need to listen to riders a lot more than traditionally has been done in places like New York.
I definitely agree with that. My point would be from you know, people all over this country are getting kicked out of their homes or their apartments and losing their cars and whatever, and their jobs and all of that. Okay. The one thing we've been able to do with zero fare is give people more access. If you only had access based upon the money in your pocket or whatever, and all this has happened to you and you can only get so far, what does that do? Okay, as a transit agency, we're opening up the region, okay, to wherever they need to go to help get a job, to get some health care, to whatever that is. Opening up the region to everybody gives everybody a little hope. It gives you more of an opportunity to look for another job or get a better one or whatever that may be. And it's a small price to pay for the amount of money that it brings back. Okay. Just like I said, and nobody can talk to me about zero fare and say, oh, it just doesn't work. Oh, because they tried that. All right. Oh my gosh, everything, society's going to break down. Cats living with dogs. Nothing's going to work. You know, it didn't happen. All right. It didn't happen. Our folks are absolutely blessed and thankful that we've been able to do this. And it has allowed them opportunity. And we're actually getting the stuff together now, the data together now to be able to tell that story. The only bad story anybody can tell is, well, back in 1989, I read a report in Austin and in Denver that, oh, it didn't work. And there were gangs all over the place. And that's, you know what, we're setting a standard. We're going to have a model to come out with. The return on investment, the amount of money that this gives back to the community and back to economic development and back to sales tax revenue and all that far outweighs what you were charging in the revenue. It's just if you as a transit agency can work with local government rather than against it, just saying, give us the money.
Well, Robbie, I'd love that point. You know, it's funny, underneath one of the points you just made, which is like, what's the worst that's going to happen? And is your imagination of the worst consequence worse or better, I suppose, than the consequence of no action, right? The no build option. And, you know, when we looked at slow streets and flex streets, there were a number of worst case scenarios that we played out. And we're like, okay, that's actually not as bad as not acting, right? You know, a number of people said, you know, what if people are confused? Then hopefully they drive slower, right? Like, what if people can't commute as quickly? Might also be okay. What if there isn't enough parking? We'll see, right? Like, but at each stage, you know, I'll use the business as an example. I see a question in the panel. It's like people had said, well, you know, what if there isn't enough parking for businesses if they're using it for outdoor dining? I'm like, they're going to have to figure that out because you can't eat indoors. So like, there are going to be these trade-offs, and it's time for us to actually really have a meaningful conversation about what is the priority we're trying to achieve. Is it to, you know, maintain space for cars? Is it to maintain space for certain types of people? Or is it to advance our vision for, you know, a more just society? And I would offer that, frankly, when people, and this is not a critique of anyone specific, you know, I think that if people really dug deep, they might actually recognize that they're not in line with the thinking they think they have. I shared with someone who was really excited about our Slow Streets program, and he lives in like our most affluent neighborhood here. And he said, you know, I really want ours to be permanent, you know, and you know, kind of like, how dare you not have made this permanent? And I said, well, last Monday we announced that we're going to make them permanent. And he's like, well, I want, so I was like, well, we're focusing on our priority neighborhoods first. Here's the link. And our priority neighborhoods are our most disinvested neighborhoods, which are Black and brown communities. And his response was, you know, I can really appreciate the focus on equity. That's great. And I think that we should also find a way to support people who are paying the most property taxes. And I was like, really what you're saying is that you actually don't care about equity. You should just say that, because then we'll be having a real conversation. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, that's a terrific point. And I want to kind of pull in some questions from our audience, and maybe to kind of pick up on that. something a little more relevant or tied to specifically from New York to New York, it's always great to learn from other cities. This is a question from Robert specifically to Warren, and perhaps framed around the fact that the city just launched its open storefronts program, I think just yesterday. The question is, does the city of Oakland have a strategy to create street space for street vendors who tend to be more marginalized as well? So kind of that focus on equity with that program.
Straight answer, yes. It's actually baked into our program. So there are a couple of ways that you can use our Flex Streets program. The first is if you're a brick and mortar store, you can claim the sidewalk space outside of your business or work with your neighbors to use the parking spot or even close the whole street. That's option one. For groups that don't have a brick and mortar store, so let's say, for example, food trucks, we actually didn't have rules for food trucks. Technically, they were illegal and we just didn't enforce it. Don't tell anyone. And so we made a rule that they can, in fact, be within a distance of each other. We actually are now encouraging them to use city parking lots so that they can kind of make a okay corral, but also physically distance themselves. And then finally, and I think, I saw Robert's question earlier, for the folks who are just merchants that go to farmers markets, for example, or just don't have a traditional brick and mortar location, we are working with community groups. Like, I'll give you an example. There's one called Black Cultural Zone, which represents a significant portion of East Oakland. And we gave them a free master lease to a pretty large city parcel kind of within the district. And they use it for a weekly market. And they provide space for all of the different merchants to kind of create a pseudo mall, I guess, but it's an outdoor bazaar is the best way to put it, right? The second instance is at Lake Merritt, where kind of all of this turmoil got started, where we actually engaged all of the Black merchants who sort of use the lake makes a Y, and the top portion of the Y is the sort of like area where a lot of Black merchants congregate and sell barbecue, very good barbecue. And sorry, Robbie, it's not as good. It's good enough. I'll just respect that already. And we created a pilot for them and took over a street that's just next to where they were on the sidewalk and on the lawn, and gave them a lot more space. So to answer your question, yes, we are happy to help lift up small merchants that don't even have a traditional space. And we are using some of our CARES dollars to actually pay for technical assistance and for water walls and for cones and traffic signs and everything to make all of that possible.
Thanks for that, Warren. And I know we're getting signaled that Robbie needs to jump on another call right now, but I think that's an interesting tie of his argument that we really need to tie transit to economic development planning. So thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us. I'll pass it to you, Emily, to close us out.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry that we're cutting it. I could listen forever. You guys are great. I really want to close out with my thanks to Betsy, Warren, and Robbie for joining us this afternoon, and to you, Guillermo, for your excellent moderation. For folks who are ready to continue the discussion, we invite you all to stick around this afternoon for our power lunch. Following this event, we're hosting small breakout groups with attendees and ANHD and forum staff. The link for a separate Zoom link is circulating in the chat if you want to hop onto that. And finally, please join us again on Thursday, November 19th for a discussion on healthy housing with Jonsara Ruth of Health Materials Lab and candidate for Pennsylvania State Senate, Nikil Saval. I really want to thank the Forums Board and Directors Circle and ANHD's 10th Annual Conference supporters who helped make this afternoon possible. And if you're interested in learning more about supporting our series, please be in touch with Lauren Nye at ANHD or Dan McPhee at the Forum. And of course, share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag #PowerAfterThePandemic. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sharing your brilliant ideas. I'll see you all soon. Have a good one.